Good afternoon. This hearing will come to order. Chairman Graves will be joining us shortly. I'll fill in for him here in the interim. Would like to thank all of our witnesses for taking the time to be able to join us here today. To be able to gain an advantage in an increasingly competitive marketplace, small businesses are looking for innovative ways to be able to cut costs and be able to gain access to customers. One small way that businesses are doing this is through the use of cutting-edge technologies that can provide efficiencies, and Bitcoins may be one of these innovative technologies. Bitcoins are a form of virtual currency first introduced in 2008 that allows users to exchange value digitally through the Internet. Despite not being backed by a government or holding any intrinsic value of their own, Bitcoins are growing as an alternative payment method. This hearing will examine the benefits and risks associated with Bitcoin as a payment system for all small businesses. While the origins of Bitcoin remain mysterious, it has grown rapidly in the last few years. Businesses choose to accept Bitcoin for many reasons, including to be at the forefront of new technology, to attract customers now using Bitcoin, to lower transaction fees from credit and debit cards, and to eliminate certain kinds of fraud. Despite these advantages, there are numerous risks that small businesses should consider before implementing a Bitcoin payment system. These risks include volatility of price, security, and policy uncertainty. Further recent developments in the Bitcoin industry have cast a shadow on security and sustainability. Hacking attacks have led to the downfall of a leading Bitcoin exchange company, while its use for criminal activity has led to greater scrutiny by law enforcement and other federal and state banking regulators. We've invited a distinguished panel of experts who will explain what Bitcoin is, and we appreciate that, and how it operates, why it might be a good fit for small businesses, and what the risks are associated with Bitcoin. We hope that by providing information about Bitcoin, small businesses will be in a better position to know whether adopting Bitcoin as a payment system might be a way for small businesses to be able to gain more customers. This hearing will also inform members as we consider implications of policies affecting the use of virtual currencies. With that, I'd again like to thank our distinguished panel of witnesses for joining us here today, and I now recognize the ranking member for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today. American entrepreneurship is closely linked to technological innovation. Whether it was the arrival of Google or Facebook, the widespread use of smartphone apps, or cloud computing, our nation's entrepreneurs drive many technological developments. Not only do small firms help create new technologies that drive growth, but they often benefit from the advent of new systems and processes. The relatively recent arrival of digital currencies is one technology that presents significant opportunity. Just as the Internet has empowered entrepreneurs to reach new global markets and identify more efficient ways of doing business, digital currencies like Bitcoin can save small firms on transaction costs. For a small company accepting major credit cards, each card swipe can cost as much as 1/4 of a cent, in addition to having to return 3 to 6% of sales total to the credit card company. Some credit card companies also charge businesses to join the network. By contrast, when utilizing Bitcoin, there is no cost of joining the network. Fees are less than 1%. For large retailers and big box stores, this cost may sound minor, but among small companies operating on thin margins, those expenditures add up. Moreover, should currencies like Bitcoin become widely utilized, they could create competitive pressure for conventional financial institutions to lower transaction fees in an effort to retain small business customers. Beyond allowing small firms to save on transaction costs, Bitcoins offer consumers other advantages. For customers seeking anonymity, Bitcoins provide more privacy than credit card transactions. Small firms are gradually recognizing the promise of accepting Bitcoins. In 2012, about 1,000 businesses used BitPay, the largest processor of Bitcoin payments. Today, more than 13,000 small businesses in the U.S. employ this service. While most are online sellers, 1 in 5 are traditional brick-and-mortar operations, suggesting the technology is gaining broader acceptance. Although this growth sounds promising, a number of unanswered questions might be impeding small businesses' use of Bitcoin. Price fluctuation for Bitcoins create complications. Last spring, Bitcoin's dollar exchange rate rose sharply from $50 to $350 and then fell to $70. With swings like this, one has to wonder whether small businesses will find it difficult to continually price and reprice their products in order to ensure they receive fair compensation from customers. There are also security questions. Hacking incidents in 2012 and 2013 endangered many users' Bitcoins. More recently, the bankruptcy of Mt. Gox, one of the largest Bitcoin exchange, was followed by news that the company has lost hundreds of millions of dollars in Bitcoins. For small businesses to fully benefit from this currency, customers must be assured their money is safe and cannot be snatched out of cyberspace. It also remains to be seen how the IRS recent ruling declaring Bitcoin a property as opposed to a currency will impact this technology growth. In all these areas, the committee has an obligation to ensure small business interests are taken into account. We want small firms to benefit from this technology, but we must see to it that there are safeguards protecting them and their customers. Likewise, we must see that tax regulatory changes do not preclude the use of this currency. I expect today's hearing will help us learn about complex issues like this and assist the committee as it addresses such matters going forward. In that regard, I would like to thank our witnesses for being here, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Velasquez. If committee members have an opening statement prepared, I ask that they submit it for the record. I'd like to take a moment just to be able to explain our timing lights. You will each have 5 minutes for your testimony. The light will start out as green. When you get into the danger zone is when it moves to yellow. And when it gets to the red, if you would conclude your statements at that time, we would appreciate it. So again, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this afternoon. Our first witness is Mr. Jerry Brito, Senior Research Fellow at Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Mr. Brito focuses his research on technology, Internet policy, copyright, and regulatory process. Mr. Brito is a co-author of Bitcoin, a primer for policymakers. Mr. Brito, thank you for being here, and I look forward to your testimony. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me here today to comment on Bitcoin's use for small businesses. Virtual currencies and electronic payment systems are nothing new. They have existed for decades. So what is it about Bitcoin that makes it unique? Bitcoin is the world's first completely decentralized digital currency, and it's the decentralized part that makes it unique. Prior to Bitcoin's invention in 2009, online currencies or payment systems had to be managed by a central authority, whether it was Facebook issuing Facebook credits or PayPal ensuring that transactions between its customers were reconciled. However, by ingeniously solving some long-standing problems in computer science, Bitcoin for the first time makes possible electronic transactions that are person-to-person without the need for an intermediary between them, just like cash. This technical breakthrough presents both potential benefits and risks for consumers and small businesses. For example, because there is no central intermediary in Bitcoin transactions, fees associated with those transactions are relatively small. Small businesses accepting credit card payments often face fees of around 25 cents for each card swipe plus 2 to 4% of the transaction total. If you're a small margin business, those fees can really eat into your bottom line. In contrast, businesses that use a merchant processor like BitPay or Coinbase pay fees of 1% or less on Bitcoin transactions. If you're a small margin business, that difference could mean doubling your profits. Another reason small businesses are attracted to Bitcoin is that, like cash, all transactions are final. And again, because there is no central intermediary, there is no third party that can reverse a transaction. This protects small businesses from chargeback fraud, which often results not just in the loss of a sale, but also in penalty fees. And such friendly fraud accounts for 41% of all claims. And if a merchant has 1% of their charges reversed as chargebacks, they can often be kicked out of the credit card networks, potentially ending their business. And finally, because Bitcoin is decentralized, businesses can now accept international payments that were not previously possible. There are over 50 countries that traditional payment processors do not serve, often because of high fraud rates. Because Bitcoin payments are global and final, doing business with consumers in those countries, especially in developing countries, is now feasible. For consumers, the benefit Bitcoin presents is essentially choice. Wishing to encourage its use, merchants frequently offer discounts to customers who pay with Bitcoin. This means consumers will be able to choose to pay a little more and get the benefits of using a credit card, like fraud insurance and airline miles, or they can choose to pay a little less by using Bitcoin. For some price-sensitive consumers, this could be a very valuable choice. Of course, there are also risks associated with Bitcoin. Chief among these is Bitcoin's historic volatility. It has traded from a low of pennies when it was first introduced in 2009 to a high of $1,200 last December, with wild short-term swings. However, there's nothing inherent in Bitcoin's design that naturally makes it so extremely volatile. Its extreme volatility is likely attributable to the fact that it's a new currency. Bitcoin is still an experiment, and it's still in the process of discovering a more stable price. Additionally, as a nascent currency, it is very thinly traded, and as a result, a single large enough trade can affect the exchange price substantially. If Bitcoin's use continues to expand, potentially we could expect to see extreme volatility subside. Additionally, derivatives that allow investors to bet against the price of Bitcoin will soon become available, and this should help stabilize the price as well. The volatility risk is one that a small business faces if it accepts Bitcoins directly. It should be noted, however, that small businesses can use Bitcoin entirely as a payment system without ever holding Bitcoins. And in fact, this is what most small businesses do. Using a merchant service company like BitPay or Coinbase, merchants can denominate merchants can denominate prices in dollars, not in Bitcoin, and denominate their prices in dollars, accept Bitcoins for payment at the current exchange rate, and then immediately convert those Bitcoins to dollars, never actually holding a Bitcoin. Security is another concern. Because Bitcoin is essentially a digital cash, securing it is vitally important. There is no intermediary that can replace your Bitcoins if they are stolen. As we have seen, however, merchants need not hold Bitcoins. And as interest in Bitcoin expands, we are seeing a great deal of innovation and investment in secure consumer products. But this still means that exchanges, merchant processors, and other new Bitcoin intermediaries will have to earn consumers' trust, just as Visa and PayPal have. Like the Internet itself, Bitcoin has the potential to be a platform for the kind of permissionless innovation that has driven so much of the growth of our economy. And like all emerging technologies, Bitcoin also presents risks. The challenge for policymakers is to address those risks while doing no harm to the innovative potential of the technology. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir. Our next witness is Adam White, Director of Business Development and Sales at Coinbase. Coinbase is a payment processing company for businesses interested in accepting Bitcoin. Prior to joining Coinbase, Mr. White served in the United States Air Force and was a test pilot for NASA before receiving his MBA from Harvard Business School. Appreciate you being here with us today, Mr. White, and look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Velasquez, and other members of the committee for the opportunity to appear here today. My name is Adam White, and the Director of Business Development and Sales at Coinbase, a company founded in June 2012 with the goal of making it easy for merchants and consumers to transact with the digital currency Bitcoin. More than 1 million consumers use Coinbase as their digital wallet, and as of today, there are nearly 28,000 businesses that entrust Coinbase to accept Bitcoin payments on their behalf using our payment tools. These merchants include large enterprise-level businesses such as Overstock.com and Big Fish Games, as well as tens of thousands of small businesses like Teelit, Tuft & Needle, and Mondo Sellers. Prior to my role at Coinbase, I served as a captain in the United States Air Force and am a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. I'd like to begin today by outlining the inherent benefits of Bitcoin in commerce, namely the powerful prevention of fraud, the reduction of transaction fees, and the monetization of new markets, and how these benefits can be a positive influence on businesses of all sizes. Bitcoin enables individuals to push payments to merchants without having to share personally identifiable information that can be intercepted by criminals and used for fraudulent purposes. This irreversible nature of Bitcoin enables the abstraction of personal information and significantly reduces the risk of fraud, something that merchants, card processors, and banks spend billions of dollars per year combating. With Bitcoin, for example, the target data breach that compromised 40 million consumers' credit card information would not have been possible. Moreover, this irreversibility shields merchants from chargebacks, that is, the forced return of funds from a merchant to a customer's bank account, and the cost associated with managing, defending, and preventing fraudulent chargeback claims. In response, many card issuers and merchants use fraud detection systems that are overly sensitive to trigger activities, especially in card-not-present transactions common online. Initial estimates suggest that some merchants turn away nearly 8% of incoming orders due to issues associated with suspicious activity. Many of these transactions, however, are in fact legitimate. Bitcoin prevents the need for risk algorithms and ensures merchants capture 100% of their customers' orders. Due to the powerful prevention of fraud and the reduction in the number of intermediaries required to process a payment, Bitcoin transactions are dramatically less expensive than traditional card-based payments. Merchants can reduce their electronic payment acceptance fees to less than 1% when accepting payment in Bitcoin. This is especially important for small businesses that sacrifice anywhere between 3 and 5% of their revenues in card transaction fees. Businesses can use these savings to reinvest in their company or return them to consumers in the form of lower prices. Moreover, merchants are not subject to a fixed fee per transaction, enabling them to forego minimum transaction limits and sell small ticket items profitably. Finally, Bitcoin provides the opportunity to monetize new markets by democratizing foreign exchange and enabling frictionless cross-border transactions that settle immediately. Many products and services are not available for sale in foreign countries because the business cannot manage the payment systems needed to support overseas commerce. Because of the borderless and global nature of Bitcoin, a Bitcoin payment made by a customer in New York looks identical to a merchant as a Bitcoin payment made by a customer in London, Buenos Aires, or Tokyo. There are no individual currency conversion fees associated with Bitcoin payments, so merchants can sell low-margin items just as profitably abroad as they do domestically. The ability to easily begin accepting payments from customers around the world can open up whole new markets for merchants and significantly improve top-line revenue. We see Bitcoin as an extremely powerful technology, and it is our goal to bring these efficiencies created by the Bitcoin network to the masses. We are encouraged to see the committee's proactive examination into the topic of Bitcoin as it relates to small businesses, and I look forward to engaging in dialogue and answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. White. Our next witness is Mark Williams, a professor of finance and risk at the Boston University School of Management. Before joining the faculty at Boston University, Mr. Williams worked as a senior trading floor executive, a bank trust officer, and as a bank examiner for the Federal Reserve Bank. Mr. Williams holds an MBA from Boston University School of Business and a BS from the University of Delaware. Welcome, Mr. Williams, and please begin.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me. In particular, I'm very interested in Bitcoin, and the reason for that interest really stemmed from classroom discussions going back to 2011. At that point in time, prices were 35 cents, so it was more of a theoretical discussion, but very quickly within the classroom, it moved from discussion to, by 2012, when Bitcoin prices started to increase by over $1, to actually homework assignments. And then eventually, these homework assignments turned into outright discussions and debate in the classroom. By 2013, the price of Bitcoin, by January, had increased actually to $13 a coin. Very quickly in 2013, it escalated from $13 all the way up to $1,200. It was remarkable. But what was unusual about this price run-up at the peak in 2013 was the fact that this was a 9,000% increase. Nowhere on this planet or any planet has there been that sort of price increase. And what that represented to the marketplace in particular is the fact that this was a unique product and a unique risk. So what I'd like to do today is I'd like to focus specifically not on the promised benefits of Bitcoin, because we've heard enough about that, but I'd like to take my discipline in risk management, in particular working on a commodity trading floor, and talk specifically about the risks that are associated with Bitcoin. In particular, I've provided a 30-page testimony which outlines 10 of the specific risks, what I consider to be the top risks associated with Bitcoin. But what I'd like to do for the committee right now is really focus on the top 6 risks, and I'll leave this up for the discussion later. In particular, the first risk, which is very important to look at, is that for big businesses and for little businesses, is that Bitcoin itself is not legal tender. And what I mean by that is the fact there's no legal precedence, that is, that sets that individuals and corporations themselves have to accept Bitcoin. So as a result, it's a very voluntary commodity. So just as equally as we can turn the light off today, if the market decides they don't want to accept Bitcoin anymore, the value could drop to worthless. Now, what's very interesting about that statement of worthless, we've seen Bitcoin drop already. Since its high in December, it's dropped by roughly 60%. So clearly, this is not a currency. Currencies don't behave like this. But what this is a high-risk speculative commodity. Since December, what have we seen? We've seen daily price movements of up to 10%. Can you imagine having currency in your wallet that can move up or down by 10%? That would be hot currency. If you're worried about it dropping by 10%, you'd be selling it very quickly, getting it out of your wallet. If you thought it would appreciate, you would hoard it. And these characteristics are characteristics that you see in Bitcoin. Over 90% of Bitcoin is hoarded. What that means is only 10% of what's available trades. Increasingly, we've had changes within the marketplace. Last week, the IRS came out with a formal ruling and said Bitcoin is not currency. What it is, it's property. And what that means, it reduces the likelihood of people to use it to spend. It actually gives a disincentive. What it increases, though, is the incentive to hoard. So this is the opposite of what you want in a currency. Currencies, we collectively use currencies because currencies themselves provide us with the ability to buy things. A $100 bill has not value to us to put on the wall, but that $100 bill has value for us to buy art that we can then put on the wall. Bitcoin is unusual in that regard. The fascination and fixation of investors on Bitcoin is tied directly to it as a commodity, as something to speculate, not as something to use as a transactional currency. So what are some of the other risks? There's extreme price volatility. That was discussed earlier as well. And with that extreme price volatility with daily movements of 10%, what that means, to put it in perspective, Bitcoin is 7 times more risky than gold, 8 times more risky than the S&P 500. In particular, it's 15 times more risky than the US dollar. And just for fun, I'll throw this out. If you look at the Argentinian peso, Bitcoin is 7 times more risky than the peso. So as you can see, this is not currency, but this is a very risky commodity. But more importantly, when we think about businesses, your average business, they actually have profit margins of maybe 10%, 15% to be liberal. If you have a daily fluctuation of 10%, what that means is that profit margins can be evaporated within a period of days, and that's of concern. 2 quick more risks that I'll bring up to the committee, and that's the asset bubble. Many noted economists have mentioned of this asset bubble, and we've seen it actually since December start to implode. As I mentioned, the price dropped by 60%. In addition, the number 5th risk is a growing concentration risk. We're seeing firms like Coinbase doing a nice job of trying to mitigate the market risk, but what's happening is they're moving the risk from, let's say, 20 or 30,000 people to their balance sheet. So they're warehousing that risk, and there's not a mature market for them to offload that risk. So we have concentrated risk on their books. They're thinly capitalized. They're a startup. There's no minimum capital requirements. So what should happen if one of these or both of these firms were to blow up? Then consumers, the U.S. businesses would be impacted. And then finally, when we think about Bitcoin, there's Bitcoin tax, which now is a risk in the sense of using Bitcoin on a daily basis, deciding whether to pay, for example, employees or actually accepting it as currency. If you're having daily fluctuations of 10%, you can see capital gains very quickly. So I thank you for your patience.
Gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind, we apologize. Naturally, when we start, we get a vote called. And we want to make sure that our last witness has the appropriate amount of time, and our folks are going to be able to listen. So we'll go into recess, run over and vote. I believe it's going to be a short vote, and should be back in 20 minutes or so. Is that about right? So if you don't mind, and apologize, and certainly appreciate your patience. Thank you.
We'll go ahead and call the hearing back to order, and I now yield to Ranking Member Velasquez for introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Michael Cuvion. Professor Cuvion is an Associate Professor of Economics at Plymouth State University's College of Business Administration. His current research includes asset allocation modeling and alternative investment vehicles such as Bitcoin. Additionally, he has worked with the Enterprise Center at Plymouth to educate local small business owners in New Hampshire about the advantages and disadvantages of Bitcoin. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much, and thank you to members of the committee for inviting me. I thought I would take a slightly different tack this afternoon and not discuss the nuts and bolts of Bitcoin, because you've heard so many excellent comments about that before. My interest in Bitcoin started about 3 semesters ago when one of my best students wrote a research paper in a class on Bitcoin. He was a passionate advocate for Bitcoin, and he liked it so much he actually put $100 into Bitcoin. He wouldn't tell me how many Bitcoins he bought, except that it was well under $10. So this student has graduated, and now I keep getting emails from him. Hey, check out the price of Bitcoin, because he bought it, I think, about $8, and Bitcoin is worth about $450 right now. So he's got a very nice paper profit here. So he got me certainly thinking about Bitcoin in a way I had never thought about it before. And I began to become interested in Bitcoin and opened an account with Coinbase in May of last year. I have some data in my written remarks that come from that data set, which is roughly about 10 months. So it is suggestive, it is recent, but it is by no means definitive. And some of the things I have learned I'd like to share with the committee. Coinbase charges a different price if you buy Bitcoin than they do if you sell Bitcoin. This is known as the bid-ask spread, very similar to the spreads on a NASDAQ stock, let's say, in the stock market. And just for a random day, which was March 28th, that's last week, the bid-ask spread for Coinbase was 17 basis points. That's about 0.2%. By way of comparison, the Dow Jones Industrial Average at the same time had a bid-ask spread of about 45 basis points, twice as high, and the Standard & Poor's 500 had a bid-ask spread of 32 basis points. So on that day, compared to the stock markets, Coinbase's bid-ask spread was lower. In addition, I have taken a look at the trend in the bid-ask spread. The high is 164 basis points, the minimum is 0, and the average is 40. So that's where I got that data you will see on the spreadsheet. Also, the bid-ask spread has been steadily trending down over time, and it is a significant trend. So that is important because bid-ask spreads are an excellent measure of the liquidity of any market. They also help to measure risk, because if a market is very thinly traded, you will see much larger bid-ask spreads. Then I took a look at the statistics for Bitcoin, asking what kind of distribution does it follow. And my conclusions are that the Bitcoin price return series, that is the percentage daily change, is too peaked. It has too many small moves and not enough middling moves. It's also skewed heavily to the right, and that causes a problem for using standard or traditional statistical analyses. Sorry, is my time up? No, okay. Also, I did a comparison of Bitcoin with 3 other investments: short-term global interest rates, the dollar index, and the emerging markets currency index. And essentially, I found out that none of those models predict Bitcoin. Its price is, in essence, unpredictable. You can't, with any degree of accuracy, project the price of Bitcoin more than just a few days in the future. Now, that's good if you're a small businessman, and the reason it's good is that because the average return to Bitcoin is positive, and remember, the price of Bitcoin has risen from about $85 last May to about $450 now, it's a bit seductive to a small business person, because if you were to buy Bitcoin, you would see your Bitcoin increase in value, that's only because we have a bullish trend lately. The other thing that you will discover is that the number of daily moves are fewer than they should be at less than 10%. Now, Bitcoin investors unfortunately pay for that, because while the number of 10% or more moves is less than it should be by approximately roughly 2%, if you look at the number of 15% moves, there are more than there should be. There's about 2% of the observations there, and huge moves, which we call which we call fat tails. There should be none in the data set. There were 6. 3 were positive, 3 were negative, but there were 6 price moves that would have been completely unpredictable based on chance. So again, I'd like to corroborate what your other witnesses have already told you, that Bitcoin is a very volatile currency. In terms of the other technical features, the problem with Bitcoin is that we can't analyze it using the standard tools of finance, because the underlying distribution simply does not fit our models. And that means it's hard if you are trying to use sophisticated techniques like value at risk or covariance matrices. It's hard to reach any conclusions that actually work. I realize that small businesses probably won't do that, but even large businesses will have difficulty with Bitcoin for that reason. And I gave a small example of the cost comparison, and Bitcoin works at every level from $1 transactions all the way up to $10,000 transactions. Businesses can save money if they use Bitcoin. And that, I believe, that single fact is what's going to drive Bitcoin to a successful integration into the marketplace. So there is that slight advantage right there. Offsetting that, it is difficult for businesses to use Bitcoin because they first have to educate themselves and their employees, and then they have to educate at least some of their customers in exactly how do you do a trade using Bitcoin. So there is a steep learning curve at first, but once you have managed to get your employees and your customers educated, then things go a whole lot more smoothly. There's a good role here for the government to encourage competent and detailed education on the part of the companies that do a large business in Bitcoin. Because it is so new, you have to educate consumers about that. And because there is so much risk, they also need to be clearly informed and disclosed that this is not an FDIC-insured investment. It is not something that you would ever have invested in before. So I did want to make that point. And finally, I tried to forecast the price of Bitcoin, and my model suggests that the best predictor of the price of Bitcoin tomorrow is 99% of the price today plus $4.73. And that's because there is a positive trend in Bitcoin prices. And I have a graph that shows that basically in 46 days, the price of Bitcoin could be as low as 0 or as high as $1,000. That's in 46 days. So it makes it problematic, and I believe that the market for Bitcoin will remain volatile at least for a while unless it achieves mainstream acceptance. Having said that, there are a couple of advantages of Bitcoin that have not been touched on previously, so I'd like to mention them quickly. One is that somehow you can send a message using Bitcoin. There is a way where you could say thank you for your business or some other message like that. I have no idea technically how that happens. I just know that it is possible. So it represents a different way for customers and businesses to communicate with each other. I find that is interesting, particularly if you are communicating across the ocean with customers who may be in many, many different parts of the world. That's a benefit there. And the other shoe to drop, so to speak, with Bitcoin is the IRS and its announcement recently that they are going to begin to tax Bitcoin. A lot of people are very, very upset by that in the Bitcoin community because they view it as an announcement that came late.
Time's expired.
Okay, thank you.
Now going to turn to questions, and I'll let Mr. Hanna open them up.
Thank you. Mr. Kavilian, you undermine your own argument. The volatility alone proves that it's not a storage of value. Your conversation about the S&P, or say pick a stock that is backed by a company with real assets that are in some way attachable, discernible, and measurable, because you can go to their website, you can go to their annual reports. There are 1,000 ways to figure out what it is you're buying when you buy a company. I find that completely not even relevant. This is about a storage of value that's reliable for people, that they can use and go back to, that is not volatile. As a matter of fact, any volatility at all that's more than the dollar depreciating over time or some other currency that fluctuates mildly is really, for me, a counter-argument. But I want to ask Mr. Williams, why do we need an imaginary currency? What is there about this that benefits our society or the world at large? And in terms of the underground economy, what are the effects of this? Why do we need an imaginary currency? And talk to me about the underground economy.
Great. So let me do it in reverse order. In regard to the underground economy in particular, this is a potential tool which we've seen already because of Silk Road to be used in nefarious ways. In essence, there's two aspects of Bitcoin that make it very dangerous in the wrong hands. And the one is the fact that it's anonymous. So that means whoever has it and controls it owns it. So if you have an account and someone can hack it and grab that coin, not only does that criminal own it, but there's no way to trace down who took it, and there's no way from a consumer standpoint to get it back. So in regard to the underground economy, that's one reason why it's the designer currency of choice. Now, it's unfortunate because Silk Road has sort of painted a very negative picture about virtual currencies. The second aspect of this sort of underworld of virtual currencies is the fact that Bitcoin also is not only anonymous, but it's actually irreversible. So once that transaction is done, it can't be pulled back. So let's just say it's transferred by mistake to somebody. There's no way to get that back unless that person is generous and willing to do so. So that is of concern. Now, the first question you had, an excellent question, and that really is, what is the benefit? It's questionable in the sense that clearly I view the risk much greater at this point in time than the benefits in regard to the price volatility. The fact that my colleague to my right could say within 46 days it could be worth zero. Currency is supposed to be used for transactional purposes to facilitate business. If you can't count on currency, business will not be facilitated. What will happen is that will be hoarded and GDP will drop, employment will drop, and that's a negative thing for business. So what business needs is confidence in the currency that consumers are going to use. And it's not clear to me that confidence is there with Bitcoin.
You want to rebuttal, Mr. Brito?
Thank you. I'd say a couple things. I think there's a misperception that Bitcoin is completely anonymous. Bitcoin is not completely anonymous. Cash transactions, on the other hand, are completely anonymous. If I put a bike for sale on Craigslist and I get an email from somebody I don't know, we meet at a park, I give them cash.
But credit cards aren't anonymous. I mean, they certainly don't have to be. I can trace them. Checks aren't anonymous. And frankly, trading in dollars and not paying your taxes is actually illegal. So both, I mean, there's nothing different about Bitcoin than me paying somebody in cash and them not declaring it.
So I was getting to that. Whereas cash is completely anonymous, credit cards are completely identified. Credit card company knows who I am, who the merchant is, the time, the amount, all of that. Bitcoin is in the middle. It's between cash and credit cards because while there is a record kept of every transaction, the amount, we don't know who that is. Now, this is where the Bank Secrecy Act comes in, and companies like Coinbase are required to keep a record of all of their customers. And so, for example, I have an account with Coinbase. They know my name. If there was ever a subpoena related to a particular Bitcoin transaction, Coinbase could turn over my name. So it's not.
But it requires a subpoena.
The same way they would with the credit card.
Thank you. well, right, but credit cards are allowed. I got it. Go ahead. Thank you, Chairman.
Ranking Member Velasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Cuvion, last week Iceland announced that it will be releasing a variant of Bitcoin called Aurora Coin. This is just one of many other cryptocurrencies that exist in addition to Bitcoin. What makes this currency so different from one another?
Thank you for the question. Bitcoin has what we economists call first mover advantage because it was the first successful digital currency and because it has an overwhelming market share of, I believe, more than 90%. It will likely succeed simply because they were there first. There are many, many other different types of currencies, and most of them are variations on the theme, but some offer a few different features than Bitcoin does.
And do you think that the market can sustain numerous virtual currencies?
No. And the parallel I would give is the time in the United States when banks printed their own currency before the Civil War. And we saw ultimately the government had to then step in and create a national currency, the dollar. But that's a historical parallel. How good it is, I'm not sure.
Okay.
However, I do think we will see increasing use of Bitcoin very, very rapidly. I believe it is in the growth phase of the product life cycle.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, in your testimony, you indicate that the Bitcoin financial middlemen who have multiple business lines, such as Coinbase, have an inherent conflict of interest. Can you please elaborate why you believe that this is the case?
Sure, and that's a correct statement. In the inherent conflict of interest with financial middlemen like Coinbase is, on one hand, they need to mitigate price risk for customers. So what they're interested in doing is being able to, once they have the coin, is to sell at the highest price. But Coinbase also has another business line, and that's selling Bitcoin to customers. Customers have an interest to buy at the lowest price. So just in those two business lines, there's an inherent conflict of interest.
What will regulatory oversight do to protect consumers in these cases?
Right. I would say as regulation seeps into the industry pretty quickly, regulators will look at this and say we have to actually put a wall up with this conflict of interest. It's very significant,
Okay.
and it needs to be taken care of.
Mr. White, how would you respond to this criticism?
Yeah, thank you, Ranking Member Velasquez. First off, I would say at Coinbase, we work very hard to make sure our pricing is completely transparent. So it's important to realize that we offer two prices. We offer a buy price and a sell price, and those are identical from both our merchant services as well as our consumers. So for our consumers that purchase Bitcoins and want to sell those Bitcoins, that's the exact same price that we offer to our merchants. So that bid-ask spread that Mr. Cuvion annotated was about 17 bips, 17 basis points. So we believe it's very, very small and a very fair price. There's also, in the Bitcoin market, pricing is incredibly transparent. So there are a number of websites out there, one of which is bitcoincharts.com, where you can look at the price of Bitcoin across a number of the largest exchanges or brokerages and determine if whether or not the price you want to pay for a Bitcoin on Coinbase is fair or not. We're held because of arbitrage to seek that true price as close as possible.
Okay. Mr. Brito, last week, the IRS issued guidance that Bitcoin is to be treated as a property rather than currency for tax purposes. What effect will this have on the Bitcoin and a business ability to accept it as payment?
So I'll begin by saying that I'm not a tax professional, and you should consult one, but I can say the following. It is going to introduce some accounting headaches, because every time that you dispose of a Bitcoin in a transaction, you might be subject to capital gains. What does this do for the person who's accepting it, which is your question? Maybe nothing. If they are a merchant accepting Bitcoins via Coinbase and they choose to never hold Bitcoins, they just take dollars, they really don't have to do anything with that. That is something that consumers, or the person who's spending the Bitcoin, is going to have to make that accounting. Now, it's interesting that the choice that the IRS faced was, should Bitcoin be treated for tax purposes as currency or as property? And from what I understand, if the choice had been property, it turns out that foreign currencies, if it had been treated as currency, foreign currency transactions, you have to account for a gain when you dispose of your foreign currency, just as if it was property. The only difference is that there is a de minimis exemption for currency of $200 per transaction. So in essence, if it had been treated as currency, any transaction under $200, you really didn't have to worry about that accounting. We might hope to see that kind of de minimis exemption for property.
Mr. Williams, would you care to comment on that question?
Well, I view the blow last week with the IRS as devastating, in particular to Bitcoin. As I mentioned earlier, 90% of the coins are hoarded. So in that kind of economy, very few coins circulate. So that's not very liquid. We could look at bid-ask spread. That's only one measurement of liquidity. When we add now the IRS ruling last week, that increases and encourages consumers to hoard more, not less. And as a result, that reduces liquidity even more. So it's very concerning. Being the leading financial market in the world, how we view this is extremely important, and it's going to set the tone for other nations as they try to regulate this currency as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Shavit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple questions. In February, CNN Money ran an article regarding the illegal website Silk Road, and that's come up a couple times already in this hearing, and its relationships with Bitcoins. In it, they wrote, and I quote, "The Silk Road is primarily used to buy and sell drugs. Bitcoins are the only kind of currency accepted on the site because they are traded electronically and are difficult to trace to individuals," as has also been mentioned. That's a direct quote from the CNN Money Market or Money Report. My question is this: if Bitcoin transactions are difficult to trace and also are irreversible, how do we prevent Bitcoins from facilitating criminal activity? And I would open that up to anybody who might like to address it.
So I think you begin by applying the Bank Secrecy Act and Know Your Customer rules to new Bitcoin intermediaries, and that is something that FinCEN and Treasury Department has already done, and we're seeing these new intermediaries complying with those regulations. Second, I think it's a question for law enforcement, and every time I've spoken to law enforcement, I've heard law enforcement testify. For example, last November's hearing before the Homeland Security Committee, law enforcement has said that they are less concerned about virtual currencies being used for these illicit transactions online than they are about centralized virtual currencies or about cash, indeed. So I think it's a matter of law enforcement doing their job, and they say that they are up to the task, and it's a matter of enforcing our existing money laundering laws.
Thank you. Any of the other members like to address? Mr. Williams?
I view the anonymous part of Bitcoin as actually being the Achilles heel. The fact it's anonymous, it makes it very dangerous, not only for criminal use, but also for consumers. If these coins are stolen by criminals, they cannot be returned.
Okay. Thank you. I'll go on to another question. Of the number of businesses who sell their services or sell their products online, what percentage would you say, and I know it's difficult to know what it is for sure, but what percentage would you say of the businesses actually accept in some form Bitcoins as for their items? Mr. White?
I'll take that. So at Coinbase, we have roughly 28,000 merchants that use our payment tools as of today. What's interesting to note is the vast majority, and it's difficult to say with any certainty, but by and large, probably 95%, if not more, are small businesses. And these are organizations or individuals that are confronted with high credit card fees, issues with chargebacks, and financial risk they're just not prepared to handle. And Bitcoin enables them to bypass or avoid a lot of those issues.
Let me ask you a question. When you say they're small businesses, is there a particular type of small businesses that they are in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now what we see is Bitcoin's an incredibly seamless experience when used online. So in line with payment options on a website, it's very simple. Using a Coinbase product, you can click out, or you can check out in as simple as 2 clicks. The vast majority of these businesses are e-commerce facing companies where they sell their products online and accept Bitcoin as a form of payment just with PayPal or credit cards.
Okay. Now, if you have 28,000 yourself with your company, how many others are out there? What percentage are we talking of the overall businesses on the Internet?
So between Coinbase and our competitors, my best guess would be there's roughly 50,000 businesses that are accepting.
Altogether, you mean?
Altogether here in the U.S., correct.
And how many are we talking about theoretically? Because I know it's pretty hard to know exactly what it is. 50,000 out of...
The vast majority are going to use a Bitcoin payment processor like Coinbase because they want to shield themselves.
I'm not asking that. I'm asking the 50,000 businesses that are actually utilizing Bitcoin now. Out of a universe of how many businesses on the Internet are we talking about? If anybody else might know that.
I imagine it's a very small fraction of businesses, small businesses that accept Bitcoin. I imagine it's less than 1% at this
Okay, that's what. Would you agree with that, Mr. White?
I would agree.
Probably
Yes.
talking less than 1%. And you would assume over time, I would assume you would hope that that would grow substantially over time.
We're seeing our merchant services grow at about 10% month over month.
Okay. Are there online gambling businesses that are using this now, and are those any of your folks?
To the best of my knowledge, there are. At Coinbase, we don't have the resources to ensure proper compliance with those online gambling organizations, so we do not provide Bitcoin payment processing services for them. But the thing with Bitcoin is you don't necessarily need to use a payment processor like Coinbase. An individual could create an online gambling site and accept Bitcoin directly. But that's not something at Coinbase we support.
Okay, thank you. I see that my time is ready to expire, so I'll yield back. Thank you very much.
Ms. Clark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our panelists for coming and sharing their expertise with us today. My first question is to Mr. Brito. In your written testimony, you mentioned that there's nothing inherent in Bitcoin's design that makes it naturally volatile. You attribute the current volatility to the fact that the currency is new and as such thinly traded. My question is twofold. First, how is it that a currency backed by nothing more than market forces and, at the very least, without a central authority to intervene in price destabilization amongst other regulatory issues, that it's not inherently volatile? And then secondly, regarding your explanation on the current volatility, I've gathered from your written testimony that you believe time and increased trading and use will alleviate current volatility. A cynic might suggest that that was an oversimplification at best, or further, assumes that Bitcoin is an asset that can only appreciate, thus forcing stability. How is that unlike any of the previous bubbles we've seen inflate and pop over the course of the past 20 years?
Okay, well, I appreciate that question. So in my testimony, I think what I mentioned was that there's nothing inherent in Bitcoin's design that makes it extremely volatile. It's extreme volatility. All currencies are volatile, and Bitcoin is certainly a deflationary currency by design. But this extreme volatility that we're seeing probably is results from the fact that it is thinly traded. If Bitcoin's economy were to grow and it was much further thinly more widely traded, and if we began to see derivative products that allowed you to hedge against Bitcoin's volatility, we should see the volatility subside. Does that mean there would be no volatility? No. Is there a central bank that can intervene and basically introduce more money into the money supply to meet demand? No, there is none of that. So Bitcoin is still going to have a certain amount of volatility, but this extreme volatility is I guess, what I'm addressing. Does that mean that I see Bitcoin as only ever increasing in value? No. What I'm saying is that volatility, if Bitcoin's acceptance grows and it begins to be traded more, volatility will subside, but it doesn't mean it will subside necessarily in an increasing fashion. It will just reach, hopefully, a stable range.
Mr. Williams, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, on a few things. So since Bitcoin was created in 2009 and started trading, the volatility the first year was 160% annualized. That's just unheard of. Since then, it's dropped to 140%. So we're still in nosebleed territory. That's concerning. Structurally, there's three reasons why Bitcoin itself is so volatile. The first is the fact that it's hoarded. And that's, as I mentioned earlier, of concern because hoarding allows you to manipulate the price. The second part, which is very important, is the ownership structure itself is very small. With data that we know so far, at least looking at addresses, not knowing ownerships per se, we know that roughly 29% of Bitcoin is owned by 47 people. So you can imagine if 47 people get in the room and say, hey, let's not sell, then that sets an artificial floor. The third thing, which is extremely important, is the fact that when we think about Bitcoin and what's happening here, is not only do we have sort of this scarcity of this commodity, and that's the third point, but it's scarce in the sense that by the year 2140, it maxes at 21 million. So in essence, if you create anything that has a scarcity and you hype up demand and you get enough people that think this is the next new thing, then you're going to see prices move and you're going to see high volatility. So those are the three structural things that have happened specifically that I view is why we've seen such extreme volatility. And up to last year, the space rocket went to the moon. This year, it's coming back down to Earth.
So the second part to my question was, do we see this as a bubble? Would you characterize it as?
Yes, I would. In December of 2013, I came out very strong, adamantly saying that this was a bubble. We've also seen Alan Greenspan on December 4th, 2013, come out and say it's a bubble. We saw actually Professor Schiller, a very well-known economist from Yale, who came out in January, and it was very interesting. The way he described this bubble, he said it's not only a bubble, it's an amazing bubble. More recently, we've also seen additional examples. We know bubbles have three phases: growth, maturity, and pop, and we're clearly seeing the pop phase right now.
I'm out of time, but I thank you, gentlemen, for your response. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Mulvaney.
Sure, let's just continue right there. I guess, Mr. Williams, and this is not where I was going, but just to follow on your last comment, so what? So what if it's a bubble? It's a very small, I mean, this is not like it's the housing bubble. It's not like it's a real estate bubble. It's a very, very, very small piece of the economy, right? So what if it's a bubble?
Right. So let's go down that road. So if it's a bubble, then we have these 47 people that are harmed. There's roughly 1,000 people that own roughly 50%, so they're harmed. But it doesn't harm a greater population.
Okay.
However, the problem with that logic is the fact that we're talking not about a manufacturer manufacturing a good. We're talking about currency, which is the lifeblood of economies. We have to rely on currency and trust that currency to have effective business. So in essence, if the currency is flawed, then it impacts negatively our economy.
Right, but we just established that it's less than 1% of online trade. So, I mean, it's much ado about nothing in terms of the bubble, right? It might be, it might not be, but I guess in my mind, I'm hard-pressed to see why Congress would care if it's a bubble. But let's move on to a couple other things before I get to my own questions. I had a chance to listen to some of the questions from Mr. Shabbat, and my question to you, Mr. Brito, for example, would be, Mr. Shabbat was clearly concerned about its use, Bitcoin's use in illicit activity, whether it be drug sales, online gambling. Is it technologically possible and practically possible to make Bitcoin, say, as safe as the dollar when it comes to those types of transactions?
You're asking me if I was a criminal, would I rather use a dollar, would I rather use a Bitcoin?
I guess so.
And the answer would be no. I mean, I've heard this from numerous law enforcement folks who tell me you'd be crazy to use a Bitcoin because there's a permanent record made of every Bitcoin transaction, and that's a record that could be accessed years from now to tie you back to a particular transaction. Is it your name? No, it is not your name. It is a pseudonym. It is a Bitcoin address. But there's a permanent record made of that transaction. And what we've seen with Silk Road, which is the example that we all know of an online marketplace for drugs that use Bitcoins, is that the FBI successfully took down that website. And today, we're seeing one after another of the vendors on that website being arrested by the FBI.
Okay. Thank you. Let's get to my question then, which is the IRS decision, which Ms. Velasquez asked, I thought, some excellent questions about. Let's start with this, and I'll ask everybody to check in on this very quickly because I really don't know where you folks stand on this. Was it the right decision? Was the IRS decision to classify this as property and not currency the right decision? We'll just go right down the aisle. Mr. Couvillon, do you want to start? And I'll come back. If you say yes or no, we'll come back and ask each of you why, but I'm trying to get a sense of the panel.
No.
Okay.
Yes.
I would say no.
Tentative yes.
Okay. Here's my question, I guess, because it looks like we got which is a nice thing about having a good panel. You get different answers from everybody. It strikes me that it's a way to tax the Internet, isn't it? That right now we don't have taxes on most of the Internet sales. At least we talk about some of them. We're dealing with Main Street fairness and those types of things. It strikes me that this is a way to tax Internet trade. That if I can't tax the transaction, I will tax the currency that is used to do it. So that's where I'm coming from. Mr. White, you tell me why you think it's no. Mr. Williams, you tell me why you think it's yes.
Yes. So I think what was surprising was the misalignment between the regulators, right? Is we had FinCEN come out last year and basically describe Bitcoin as a currency. They said companies like Coinbase that operate and provide Bitcoin services, please register as a money service business under FinCEN. And we followed that guidance.
And they're doing that, right?
We are doing that, absolutely. With the IRS's recent guidance that now Bitcoin is a property, there's a mismatch there between how do you exactly describe this asset class, how do you describe Bitcoin. At Coinbase, obviously, we're working with our counsel and working closely with the IRS to seek additional guidance because what we want to do is enable as burdenless as a process as possible for our users to be able to transact in Bitcoin. And right now with this guidance, it makes buying a $2 cup of coffee nearly impossible without additional products and services to track that cost basis.
Mr. Williams, and maybe the Chairman will let you go a little bit more, but if you could give us your answers to why you think it was the right decision.
Sure. Well, when we look at Bitcoin itself, it's not a currency. To be a currency, it has to be stored value, and we see it's not of stored value at all. It actually destroys value. Second, we know it's not stable.
I'm sorry, I have to cut you off. It destroys value. If I bought it at a penny and it's worth $450, doesn't that create value? I'm sorry. What
right. So with currency, for example, you want stability. So you want to be able to put it in your wallet, not think about it, and then next week use it, not worry about the daily price movement.
I have no idea what the name of the currency is in Argentina or in Venezuela. Is it still a currency?
Yes, it is. And earlier I referred to it. Bitcoin's 7 times more risky than Argentinian peso.
And Venezuela is still a currency? I think you see my point is that it's currencies, you go through different phases are often. But go ahead, finish your thought.
So we'll move on. So in regard to another measurement of a strong currency, and that is it's stable, and we're seeing that there's volatility, so there's not stability in this currency. But most importantly, when we think about a currency, it needs to be liquid, and that is that you can get in and get out, and it's not very clear that you can get in and out at good execution. But let's move it over. So if it's not currency, what is it? And that's what the IRS is really helping with. In essence, the IRS is saying, okay, well, if it's not currency, what does it look like? Well, if we think about a commodity, right? A commodity is something that's mined. That's Bitcoin. A commodity is something in particular that actually is stored. It's something that's processed. It's something that's resold in the market. And it's something that actually has scarcity. Well, that sounds a lot like Bitcoin. So in essence, I see the IRS ruling as moving more towards commodity. At least it's calling it a product. So I think we're getting closer to the discussion we need to have about what is this.
Does Mr. White have a valid point about the misalignment? Why would he have to know his customer if he's dealing in a commodity and not a currency? To you, Mr. White, Mr. Williams. No, to you, does Mr. White have a point? Is he right about the misalignment? One part of this government is treating as currency, another is not. He shouldn't have to know his customer if he's only dealing in commodities, right?
Right. So there's a lot of uncertainty about what it is.
Right.
And so we saw that with the Treasury Department as it came in last year with this announcement with FinCEN, for example, and how they're working with money transmitters, and we're seeing with the IRS.
Thanks.
We're not seeing we're seeing more, the picture's getting clearer, but yet there's still a lot of uncertainty out there.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the Chairman's indulgence in going over a little bit.
Yes.
There we go. Okay, Mr. Payne.
Well,
5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But Mr. Mulvaney, the gentleman from South Carolina, was so thorough in his questions. He asked all of mine, so the indulgence for the additional time probably cost me my questions. So I yield back.
Mr. Payne, if you think of anything in the meantime, let us know. We'd be happy to get back to you. As we go through the discussions, a lot of times questions pop up, and we want to make sure you have an opportunity to ask anything that may come up. But I understand. I was sitting there not checking off all my questions. They were being asked as well. With that, Mr. Schweikert, you're up next for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Payne just proved he's actually the smartest member of the committee because brevity, I think, is a sign of being brilliant. And now I'm going to break that. Okay. I want to actually sort of back up a little bit and have a conversation that's a little less transactional. And I don't mean to move almost ethereal, but I sat on actually monetary policy a couple years ago, and I think we were one of the first meetings where part of it went off and we had the discussion of alternative currencies. And I almost am uncomfortable using the term alternative currency and more alternative units of value or acceptance and trade. What else is on the horizon? You know, Bitcoin appeared, what, 2009? What else is out there? What other alternative exchanges of value do you see coming that are going to take advantage of the internet universe? Because you and I can sit here and come up, if we really think it through, you know, tokens in a babysitting exchange are ultimately units of value in exchange. I mean, this is not, conceptually it's not new, but with technology, what's next on the horizon?
So I think one thing that we've been doing here is focusing so much about Bitcoin being currency or being money, and I think that misses the point, right? Currency or money has three properties, right? It is a medium of exchange, it's a store of value, and it's a unit of account. Now, Bitcoin probably is not good at all of those three, certainly not right now. As Mr. Williams has so eloquently put forth, it is not a good unit of account. I certainly wouldn't want my mortgage or my salary denominated in Bitcoin, and it's not a good store of value because of this volatility. But what about medium of exchange? Is it a good medium of exchange? And I think what the 50,000 merchants, usually all small businesses, that are accepting Bitcoin today are telling us is that this is a very good medium of exchange.
But my question was,
yes,
what's next on the horizon?
Okay, so that's so
is there
jumping from there.
Is there someone that's going to take $1 million of gold and say, I'm going to produce an electronic currency that has a gold peg? What else is next?
So I think the next thing we're going to see is that because Bitcoin at base is simply a ledger that keeps the track of transactional value being transacted, there's no reason why a Bitcoin has to represent only $1. A Bitcoin could also represent anything else: an ounce of gold, a share of stock, a car.
So you could do a commodity. You could see a generation.
Commodities markets based on Bitcoin.
Bounce to Mr. White. The question: what's next on the horizon?
Yeah, that's a great question. We see Bitcoin's more than just a payment network and digital currency. This is the first application of Bitcoin as the protocol. The core technological problem that was solved here has never been solved before, and that's the ability to prove and transfer ownership without the need of a trusted third party.
Okay, so is there the next generation on the horizon?
Exactly. So Mr. Brito said that you can attach this one Satoshi, the smallest amount of a Bitcoin, worth much less than a fraction of a penny, to an asset or a stock. So in essence, you could provide this ability to trade assets. You could also use it as a date timestamp to prove ownership of an idea using the blockchain, which is this universally distributed ledger that no one central body controls.
Okay. Mr. Williams, that sort of concept, what's next on the horizon in this concept?
Well, if you open the door and you call it a currency, then that's a real slippery slope.
Well, and you know of my preference of value of exchange.
Okay. So if we slam that door shut, then it's not a nationless currency. Then you have more control. And then what is it? Well, it's a payment system. How is it different than ACH? And the question is, well, it's definitely much more sophisticated. ACH happened, this payment system in the 1970s. The Fed had a lot of influence over that system, but it still remains to be an efficient system. So all of a sudden you have focus now on the payment benefits of Bitcoin, and then you have competition within that payment system. And we have a discussion no longer about currency.
Do you see something else on the horizon that takes this technology that goes to the next level?
Right. So then,
or a commodity peg to such an electronic currency or something else?
Right. So yes, I do. And what we'll see is more asset classes that can be pushed through this payment system.
Okay. And Mr. Kuvion, and my mother's maiden name, please, the same question. What else is next on the horizon?
In terms of sorry about that. In terms of the next thing on the horizon that I think the committee might be interested in taking a look at, there are at least 3 serious proposals to get approval to launch Bitcoin-based exchange-traded funds, commonly called ETFs, such as the Diamonds, the Spiders, the NASDAQ Cubes. There's more than 400 others. If they do get approval to launch these Bitcoin ETFs, it may be possible by the end of this year, if you have a self-directed IRA, to put, in effect, Bitcoin into your individual retirement.
Or hold a Bitcoin denominated.
Exactly.
In many ways, you'd look at it just in the reverse.
Exactly. And I'm not sure that that's a wise idea.
Mr. Chairman, I know I'm a little over time, but there's a fascinating philosophical debate underlying here for those of you who are followers of sort of monetary policy. As Mr. Williams just spoke, a nationless currency. our value of exchange. I'm not sure that's a bad thing. And in many ways, we've had it forever. I mean, a gold-pegged contract. But also something of Bitcoin. Yes, it's a challenge to being a reserve currency, but the benefits we gain as a country being the reserve currency is we have minimal transaction costs, correct?
Yes.
And if all of a sudden there's another medium of exchange that no longer has that transaction cost spiff benefit, it also becomes a threat to being the reserve currency. I mean, and let's start with Mr. Williams, just because you and I seem to be the farthest outliers from each other. Tell me where I'm wrong on both those premises.
Well, if you say what's wrong with a nationless currency, so we're back. You opened that door that we shut, I thought earlier, and that was it can't be a currency.
Well, then that's why we were, Mr. Williams, that's why we were using the term value of exchange, correct?
Right. So now if this is a value of exchange, then it won't compete with nation currencies such as the U.S. dollar.
Well, the fact of the matter is, any type of exchange, whether I'm willing to exchange diamonds or gold or anything else, ultimately is, has inflationary, disinflationary, effects on exchanges of value and commodities and other things. So first, let's go through my couple questions. Let's try these. Threat to reserve currency if it becomes an efficient means of avoiding the exchange cost? Yes, no?
I don't view it as a threat because of this high volatility that we see.
So, but if you and I are sitting here a decade from now, and there's ETFs and others, assuming this concept even survives that long, that volatility would ultimately be squeezed away because of the amount of participation. Because would you agree that much of the volatility today is because of how thin the market is?
Right. So I would disagree with that. There's structural problems, and it's less to do with the fact of how thinly it's traded. It's actually how it's structured. But so good question though in regard to looking forward. What could happen? A competition within currencies. That's what we have in the global financial markets. Sometimes the dollar is stronger, sometimes it's weaker against other currencies. So if this could ever gain that status, then it would be in the mix. It would be competitive.
But what becomes fascinating there in monetary policy is all of a sudden you'd have a currency without intervention from a central bank, which becomes a fascinating, would you actually have an honest peg of value compared to, let's be completely honest, pegs of value of currency, nation currency that do have a certain level of intervention and therefore manipulation.
So I'm going to stir it up a little bit. I've made this statement before. So with the U.S. dollar, we have central bankers in the monetary policy you've spoken about, and they determine how much of the money supply increases or decreases to spur economic growth for our businesses. If we go to a Bitcoin-type currency, then the new central bankers is the computer program itself and those miners that mine it. So the question is, it's not that central bankers go away, but they just are different people.
Yeah, and now you're heading the direction I was hoping to have the conversation. I'm sorry, I told you it was going to get slightly ethereal. Do we let, is it Berto?
Yes.
You had one comment, and then I thank you. You've been very patient with my ramblings.
I'll simply say that this is something that Milton Friedman proposed, that we should replace humans at a board determining the money supply with a computer that had a set of rules and simply determined the money supply based on the algorithm. The thing about Milton Friedman's proposal is that the computer could always you can always go in and reprogram it. A human could always go in and reprogram it with a currency like Bitcoin or another currency. Once you set the algorithm in place and you have a wide diversity of miners and others running that program, it becomes virtually impossible to change that algorithm, change the money supply.
Mr. Chairman, I'm one that believes by the end of this decade I will see another type of alternative value of exchange here, but will we have some collective or others that attach some reserve of value or a peg of value or something of that, which may deal with the stability issue, but it does actually start to become both a threat to a country like ours where we carry a large deficit and we use certain monetary policy, inflationary policies, and others to be able to value back those future payments. But in many ways, you're seeing, I think, the tip of an iceberg of a fascinating discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
As you can see, Mr. Schweikert is a very, very thoughtful member of our committee. Let's go for round two. If everybody has any extra questions, we'll go through those. We'll start with Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have one final question for Mr. Brito. Mr. Brito, you mentioned that 1/4 of Americans who are unbanked and underbanked could look to Bitcoin as an important new option, and a good number of these unbanked and underbanked individuals are one step away from absolute financial calamity. How would Bitcoin be an effective buttress against the calamity given its valuation swings?
So I said it could potentially be seen as a new option for the unbanked and the underbanked. So the unbanked and the underbanked traditionally, they don't have bank accounts, they don't have credit cards, they use payday loans, they have to buy prepaid cards. With something like Bitcoin, it allows for them to have electronic transactions and perhaps at a much cheaper cost, right? So if you are going to a merchant that's giving you a discount because you're using Bitcoin, you can do that. Is that going to happen tomorrow? No, I don't think that's going to happen tomorrow. But the beauty of Bitcoin is it is an experiment, and its potential is huge. So I think what we need to do is allow this experiment to go on. So for today, state regulators are coming up with their regulations that are consumer protection regulations that make sure that Bitcoin businesses are well capitalized, comply with disclosure, et cetera, et cetera. We need to make sure that those rules are consistent and clear so that we can have these products potentially become available to these consumers. Is it available? Is it today? No. But if we take the view that the risks just outweigh the cost, the benefits at all points, and we shouldn't even think about this thing, then we're going to, in order to avoid the risks, you're going to give up all the potential benefits, and that would be a real shame.
Thank you, Mr. Brito. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the panelists today. Yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Mulvaney, you have any second questions?
Sure,
sir?
real briefly, continue there, Mr. Brito. In terms of allowing this experiment to run its course, how damaging is the IRS decision?
So earlier you asked me if I thought the IRS decision was right or was wrong, and I said tentatively yes. Let me tell you why. The IRS only had a choice between designating it a currency or property. Those were its two choices given to it by Congress. And so between those two, I think Mr. Williams is right. Technically, it looked at the thing and it looks more like property. So technically, they probably made the correct decision that was available to it. Now, it does create this problem that Mr. White was alluding to, where potentially now if you want to buy a cup of coffee, you have to calculate your capital gains. Some folks think that it should have been treated as a currency because if it was currency, then there's a $200 de minimis exemption, right? So if you're buying something under $200, like a cup of coffee, you don't have to worry about capital gains. Perhaps it's something that Congress should consider having that kind of exemption for property, or perhaps creating a new category for virtual currencies to allow the kind of entrepreneurship and development that might get us these products out to the world.
My staffers mentioned that something, again, I know a little bit about Bitcoin, mostly on account of the presentation you made to the Monetary Policy and Trade Subcommittee of Financial Services, but I don't know that much about it. My staffers is telling that Germany has classified it in a very special way as a private currency. Is that an option that might be available to us? Is that something that makes sense?
So I'm not a tax expert, as I mentioned before, so
right.
I'm not 100% on that. I could look into that and let you know.
Mr. Williams, are you familiar with that at all? No?
No,
Okay.
I'm not a tax expert either.
Gotcha. And again, Mr. Chairman, that's what I'm hearing is it's classified as something else in other countries. So maybe Mr. Brito's onto something that it's not currency and it's not property. It's something new, perhaps not too surprising in this 21st century that we have new types of things. So it's something we'll take a look at. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. It's very enlightening.
Yes, Mr. Kuvion, you have a comment?
Yes, I do. I'd like to read a very short statement from Alastair Nebius, who is the Journal of Accountancy's editor-in-chief for tax matters. The IRS warns that taxpayers who treated virtual currencies inconsistently with the notice before the date the notice was issued will not get penalty relief unless they can establish that their underpayment or failure to properly file information returns was due to reasonable cause. Many people believe that because the IRS announcement came out 3 weeks before income tax forms are due, and because many taxpayers have already filed their income tax returns, everyone, at least for this year, should be able to use the reasonable cause.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Mr. Couvillon, if I may interrupt.
Sure.
There's no way to do that, is there? What you've just read to us says the IRS expects you to treat it as, to have been treating it as property from the beginning of time.
Yes.
And that if you filed, I guess, last year, or if you've already filed this year, they expect small business have the ability to do that? I mean, have they been tracking it as property this whole time, or have they been treating it as currency?
It can be done. You can go back and audit, but it's not something anybody thought we would ever have to do 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And so it creates a huge paperwork burden. Technology can help, but especially this year, many people think it's simply unfair to expect taxpayers to amend their returns at this late date because the IRS just issued this ruling. And,
well, Mr. Brito, not to interrupt, didn't you mention a while ago that every single Bitcoin transaction is documented so that there would be the ability then to, even in buying a cup of coffee, be able to go back and recreate a record for an individual's transaction over the course of a year to see once whether they gained or lost or whatever, and have to make at the end of the day.
Sure. And I also think that the tax consequences for this year for consumers, or at least I should say the compliance costs, are not going to be huge simply because most the folks who are today holding and spending Bitcoins, it's not your grandma, it's not your average Joe, it's people who know what they're investing in, what they're doing. And they've known that there was going to be a tax, an IRS guidance coming out soon, and so they've probably filed for extensions. So they're not filing on April 15th. They're probably doing that in September. And even if that's the case, the IRS is probably not going to audit you for very small transactions. It's going to be if you're not declaring capital gains on $20,000 worth of Bitcoin.
Who holds this document, or the database of transactions?
The transactions, it's available to anyone. It's online. You can download it. Anybody can download it at any moment.
So IRS has full access to this document, or this
it's a
data?
Database, yes.
Okay. Mr. Mulvaney, you have any other follow-ups? Mr. Herrera, you'd like to ask any questions? Okay. I don't have very many. I've just got one or two with regards to hedging Bitcoins. You mentioned a while ago, I think, Mr. Brito, they do not do that yet. Is that correct?
So there are no, to my knowledge, there are no options or exchange-traded futures or options available on Bitcoin. There are some companies today, some exchanges today that are looking to get CFTC approval to offer those. But I think Mr. White probably could speak more to how Coinbase might be hedging.
So if they're looking to start hedging, would that make it a currency then, or would that make it a commodity?
I don't think the fact that you're hedging against a value of something, that alone does not speak to whether it's a commodity or a currency.
Okay. Very good. I have no other further questions. I certainly enjoyed the conversation here. It's certainly thought-provoking to see something like this. And I think Mr. Schweikert is kind of also on the cusp here of some things by, is this today's currency, and 10 years from now, are there going to be another Bitcoin 2 or some other entity out there that called, whatever it's called, it would be a new method of transfer of payment. Who knows? I think as our economies continue to evolve and, trade continues to take place, people are going to find ways to trade. I mean, from the beginning of time, we've been bartering and trading. And so today's world is no different. We've just used currency right now as the traditional way of transacting trades. But that being said, I come from rural Missouri. There's still a lot of bartering goes on where I live. You trade this for that, and the IRS never knows anything about it. So with that, as we close the hearing, I would like to again thank all the witnesses for being here, and thank you for sharing your expertise both with the members of this committee and the small business community. I believe that today's discussion provides valuable information about the benefits and risks associated with Bitcoin and other virtual currencies as the government further examines this alternative payment system. With that, I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. This hearing is now adjourned. Thank you very much.